Today, the White House stands on Pennsylvania Avenue like something sealed by history. Its white facade is calm and immaculate. The columns align with almost ritual precision. The lawn is trimmed so perfectly, it feels as though no footprint is allowed out of place. Layers of fencing, cameras, and invisible security turn the building into a system rather than a home. Inside, the lights are always positioned just right. Doors close without a sound. Decisions capable of shifting the world are signed in absolute quiet. From the outside, power appears immovable. But there was a night when that power burned in a very different way. August 24, 1814, Washington disappeared beneath smoke. Flames consumed this building, turning ceremonial rooms into a hollow stone shell. This was not some distant structure set ablaze. This was the residence of power for a nation barely 3 decades old. The president had already fled the city, a dinner left unfinished, a few critical items taken in haste, everything else abandoned to the dark. And in the crackle of burning wood, a question emerged more clearly than any speech ever could. If power can be burned to the ground in a single night, what truly remains? But this story does not begin with fire. It begins earlier, with a decision that divided the United States at its very birth, a capital not placed in its wealthiest city, not fully claimed by the North, not fully claimed by the South, a stretch of damp land along the Potomac River, a place many believed could never sustain anything meant to last. In this video, we will turn back time to see how power was shaped by compromise, built through ambition, and raised by hands that history waited far too long to name. If you want to understand how power is truly constructed, press like and subscribe now, so you don't miss the stories behind symbols we often take for granted. Now, let's return to the moment that decided everything. Where would America place its capital, and who truly won that choice? Choosing the site, a trait of power. New York, 1789. The United States Constitution has just been ratified. The federal government officially begins to function. But one critical problem remains unresolved. The young nation still has no permanent capital. Congress moves constantly. New York, then Philadelphia, Princeton, Annapolis. Each city is only a temporary solution. Behind this constant movement lies a deeper question. Who will control power in this new republic? A nation in debt. After the Revolutionary War, the United States is financially exhausted. The combined war debts of the states exceed $75 million in 1790, a sum equivalent to tens of billions of dollars today. But the debt is uneven. Northern states, where fighting was heavier and economies relied on trade, still carry enormous financial burdens. Many southern states, by contrast, have already paid off most of their war debts. Hamilton's plan. At this moment, Alexander Hamilton serves as the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton is not the president. He is the architect of the federal government's financial system. He proposes a bold and controversial solution. The federal government will assume all state debts. This plan carries enormous consequences. First, financial authority would be centralized in the federal government. Second, the states would become dependent on federal taxation, credit, and revenue systems. Northern states strongly support the proposal. It would relieve them of crushing debt. For the South, however, the implications are very different. Southern opposition. Southern states erupt in opposition. The reason is straightforward. They have already endured years of austerity to nearly eliminate their war debts. Under Hamilton's plan, they would now be required to pay federal taxes to cover Northern debts. From their perspective, this is not national unity. It is a transfer of financial burden from North to South. Tensions rise sharply in Congress. Hamilton's financial plan, the cornerstone of the federal system, stands on the verge of collapse. The South's spokesman, two figures emerge as leaders of the Southern opposition. Thomas Jefferson, then serving as Secretary of State, is a Virginia landowner and leading voice for the agrarian South. Alongside him is James Madison, a congressman from Virginia and one of the principal architects of the Constitution. Jefferson and Madison do not oppose Hamilton because of the numbers alone. They oppose him because of what the plan represents. If financial power is centralized in the federal government and the capital is located in commercial centers like New York or Philadelphia, then the North would dominate both money and national symbolism. The question of the capital. At this point, the United States already has a president. That president is George Washington, the nation's first chief executive. Yet Washington has not chosen a permanent capital, and Jefferson and Madison see an opening. They offer a compromise. The South will support Hamilton's financial plan. In return, the national capital must be placed in the South, or at least outside the core sphere of Northern commercial influence. The dinner that changed everything. 100 and buying for spokes. In the summer of 1790, in New York, a private dinner takes place. No official minutes are recorded. No transcript survives. But after that dinner, everything changes. Hamilton's financial plan passes, and the location of the capital becomes part of the agreement. History remembers this moment as the Compromise of 1790 as the Residence Act. Later that year, Congress passes the Residence Act of 1790. The law establishes three crucial provisions. First, the federal capital will not belong to any state. Second, the federal district will cover no more than 10 square miles. Third, the president is granted authority to select the precise location. The final decision now rests with Washington. Washington chooses the land. Washington rejects New York. He rejects Philadelphia. Instead, he selects land along the Potomac River between Maryland and Virginia. The area includes Georgetown and Alexandria at its edges, but most of the territory is swampy, low-lying, and undeveloped. The site poses serious challenges: hot, humid summers, dense mosquito populations, widespread malaria. The Potomac floods regularly. Drainage is poor. The soil is unstable. Many contemporaries believe placing the capital here is a mistake. Power as geography. Washington sees something others do not. This location sits between North and South, belonging fully to neither. A capital, built from scratch, would not be dominated by Northern merchants, nor controlled entirely by Southern planters. A buffer of power, created through geography. End of Part 1. The land has been chosen. But the real question has only just begun. From this swamp, what kind of power will rise? Design. Shaping the symbol of power, Philadelphia, 1792. The land has been chosen. But another question immediately follows. A capital can sit between North and South, but what should power look like? In the early republic, architecture is not decoration, it is political language, and this language must be chosen carefully. In the spring of 1792, federal commissioners announce a public competition. They are looking for a design for the president's house. The reward is precise: $500, a sum equal to tens of thousands today, or a medal of equal value. The instructions avoid slogans, but the constraint is obvious. The building must be large enough to represent a nation, yet restrained enough to avoid any resemblance to a palace. This is not a home for a king. It is a residence for a president who could, one day, be replaced. Designs begin arriving from across the young country. Some proposals are modest, barely more than oversized private homes. Others go to the opposite extreme: grand facades, heavy ornamentation, structures that echo European courts. These designs provoke unease. Too small, and federal authority appears fragile. Too large, and the memory of monarchy returns. No one states this directly, but the fear is unmistakable. Among the submitted designs is a familiar figure: Thomas Jefferson, the same man who had argued, only 2 years earlier, that national power must not be anchored in northern commercial centers. But here, Jefferson appears not as a political negotiator. He appears as a thinker. In 1792, Jefferson is serving as Secretary of State. He has no formal role in construction, no mandate to design, but he brings something rare within the federal government: years spent in Europe, especially in France and Italy. There, Jefferson did more than conduct diplomacy. He studied architecture, ancient Roman civic buildings, Italian Renaissance villas, proportion, balance, restraint. Jefferson believes architecture shapes how citizens perceive authority. He submits a design anonymously. No name, no office, no political weight, only drawings. The design is unmistakably classical. Perfect symmetry, a central dome, clear references to Roman Republican ideals. It looks calm, rational, almost inward-looking, and it is rejected. There is no recorded debate, no public explanation, only the outcome. Jefferson understands the language of symbols, but this symbol is quietly declined, and that still does not explain the decision that follows. The winning design belongs to James Hoban. At the time, Hoban is working in Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston is not just another American city. In the late 18th century, it is one of the wealthiest ports in the country, a commercial center of the Southern economy, a place where status is expressed through buildings, a city where power is visible in stone. Hoban was born in Ireland, trained in the Georgian architectural tradition. Before arriving in America, he learned how to design for elites within strict limits. No excess, no theatrical dominance. In Charleston, Hoban builds homes for America's rising class, people who want authority to be visible, but not threatening. That experience shapes his proposal. Hoban's design recalls Leinster House in Dublin, a grand 18th century residence built for Irish nobility. But this is not imitation. Hoban removes the language of dynasty. He preserves proportion, symmetry, discipline. He strips away anything that suggests inherited rule. The result is deliberate, large enough to command respect, restrained enough to avoid fear. When the commissioners review the designs, one truth becomes clear. Hoban's proposal does not excite, but it does not alarm. And in a nation barely removed from monarchy, that balance matters more than beauty. The design is approved, and this choice is not about taste. It reflects a deeper anxiety. A president with too much authority, a residence that looks too permanent. One misstep, and the republic could resemble the empire it escaped. No document states this openly, but architecture speaks where words remain silent. On paper, it looked calm. In stone, it would become something else. Construction. Who really built power? Virginia. Autumn of 1792. The drawings have been approved. The site has been chosen. Power now has a shape on paper. But on the ground, everything is only beginning. The first stones do not come from Washington. They come from Aquia Creek, a quarry in Virginia, about 40 miles, more than 60 kilometers, from the site. Here, sandstone is cut from the earth. No machines, no mechanization, only hammers, chisels, iron wedges, and human strength. Aquia sandstone is relatively soft, easy to carve, yet durable enough to carry symbolic weight. Each block is roughly shaped at the quarry to reduce weight before transport. One wrong strike, and the stone can crack, forcing it to be discarded. From the quarry, the stone is loaded onto boats, floated along tributaries to the Potomac River, then unloaded near the construction site. From there, everything moves by land. Mud roads, wagons pulled by horses or oxen. Each journey takes days. A single block, weighing hundreds of kilograms, can overturn a wagon, injure workers, or destroy an entire shipment. Logistics here are not background work. They are a test of endurance. When the stone arrives, a workforce is already waiting. Free craftsmen, stone cutters, masons, carpenters, plasterers. Many are immigrants from Britain and Ireland. They bring trained skills. They are paid by the day or by the week. Their names appear in surviving records. Their wages, their days of labor. They can leave, even if finding other work in an unfinished capital is difficult. They have a choice. But free labor alone is not enough. The scale is too large, the timeline too tight, and here, the story shifts. Alongside free labor, the construction relies on enslaved labor. These individuals are not hired directly, they are rented from enslavers. The federal government pays money, but the payment does not go to the workers, it goes to the owners. Payroll records make this clear. Names of enslavers, numbers of laborers provided, dates of service, the people doing the work, appear only as figures. What do they do on the site? They dig foundations, haul stone, mix mortar, erect scaffolding, move materials, the heaviest tasks, the most dangerous ones. Summer brings swamp heat, humidity, mosquito-borne disease. Winter brings mud and cold. There is no option to leave, no wages paid. But the story does not end there. Among the enslaved workers are skilled craftsmen, carpenters, masons, stone workers. They perform the same tasks as free craftsmen, use the same tools, carry the same responsibility. The difference is ownership. An enslaved carpenter may frame floors, staircases, roofs. An enslaved stoneworker may place facade stones, with precision measured in centimeters. Their skill is equal. Their labor is not their own. The payroll ledgers remain, cold lines of ink. Payment to enslaver for hired black labor. No names, no biographies, no stories, only transactions. Historians have recovered a few individual names. Most remain lost to the records. Slowly, the structure rises. Thick stone walls, massive timber frames. Rooms begin to take shape. The building stands. But from the moment it does, a contradiction is already embedded within it. A nation that speaks of liberty, a symbol of democratic authority, built by hands without freedom. And no speech announces this. No document records it as a concern at the time. Yet the reality remains, inside every stone, every beam, every step. The building stood, but the contradiction was already inside it, moving in before it was finished. Power in a raw state. I was now, with common to Avendes, Washington City, November 1800. When the federal government arrives in its new capital, almost nothing is ready. There is no finished city, no stable infrastructure, and most importantly, no fully completed presidential residence. But time does not wait. The first president to occupy the building is John Adams. Adams is the second president of the United States, a veteran of the Revolution, a lawyer, a man who believes deeply in institutions rather than appearances. He does not choose this moment. He is required to arrive. Under the Residence Act, the federal government must leave Philadelphia in 1800, whether the new capital is ready or not. When John and Abigail Adams enter the president's house, the structure stands, but it does not yet function. The stone walls are complete. The roof is in place. The windows are installed. Inside, however, many spaces remain unfinished. The largest room in the building, the East Room, is entirely incomplete. No plaster, no paint, no furniture. It is an empty space, cold and echoing. Abigail Adams uses the East Room to dry laundry, not as a symbol, not as a statement, simply because it is the only room large enough, well ventilated, and unused for any other purpose. Cold quickly becomes a serious problem, and the winter of 1,800 inches. Washington is damp, harsh, and penetrating. Many fireplaces do not work. Chimneys are unfinished. Even rooms that can be occupied are difficult to heat. Abigail Adams writes letters describing these conditions. Those letters still survive. She describes a vast house that feels empty, cold, and difficult to live in. Furniture is scarce. Federal funds are limited. Household items must be transported from Philadelphia along roads that are barely developed. Many rooms remain completely bare. Others contain only the most basic necessities. The residence feels less like a home and more like a skeletal framework of power. Outside, the Capitol itself is unfinished. Washington City in 1800 is a sprawling construction site. Roads turn to mud when it rains. Dust fills the air when they dry. Pennsylvania Avenue, Manglese-Plein, is little more than a long stretch of earth, not yet recognizable as a grand boulevard. Government buildings stand scattered, far apart, separated by empty land. At night, the city nearly disappears into darkness, and yet power is already present. Not in comfort, not in order, but in obligation. The president must be there. The government must function. The symbol must exist, even if the conditions are not ready. Adams attempts to perform his duties. He receives visitors. He works. He governs from within an unfinished structure. But it is clear the building is not yet ready for the authority it is meant to contain. Adams' time in the House is brief, only about 4 months. In March 1801, after losing the election to Thomas Jefferson, he leaves Washington. He never returns. That short occupancy leaves a lasting reality. National power arrives before comfort. The symbol is established before it can truly be inhabited. The building now has occupants, but it is still unfinished. And that still does not explain what happens when power meets catastrophe. Jefferson. Redefining the space of power. Washington City, March 1801. When Thomas Jefferson takes the oath of office, he enters a building that is still unfinished. Power is already present, but the space around it is not. Jefferson understands this instinctively. He has long believed that architecture does more than house authority. It shapes how authority is exercised. Jefferson does not arrive as a temporary occupant. He arrives with the intention to reshape how power moves within the building. Early in his presidency, he begins altering the structure of the president's house, not by making it larger, but by making it less theatrical. One of the most significant changes is the construction of the east and west terraces. And these covered walkways connect the main residence to service buildings beyond. They are more than passages. They conceal logistics, reducing the visibility of servants and operations within public spaces. In Jefferson's view, power does not need to display every motion it makes. The terraces also change how the building appears. The house no longer reads as a single, isolated block of authority. It begins to extend horizontally, settling into the surrounding landscape. An architectural choice with political meaning. At the same time, Jefferson pushes to complete the interior. Rooms left unfinished during Adams' brief occupancy are plastered, painted, and put into real use. The East Room begins to resemble a ceremonial space rather than a storage hall. Reception rooms are clarified. Workspaces are defined. The building starts to function as a center of governance, not merely as an architectural shell. But Jefferson's focus does not stop inside. He looks outward. Jefferson takes particular interest in the landscape surrounding the house. Instead of defensive emptiness, he envisions openness. Trees are planted, paths are laid, sightlines are widened. The president's house is no longer just a residence, it becomes part of a city taking shape. How Jefferson uses the space also alters how power is perceived. He rejects many European court rituals. He hosts simpler gatherings. He allows broader access to public rooms. Not everyone is admitted, but the distance is reduced. Power no longer towers from above. It sits lower, in rooms with softer light, and more human scale. These choices have lasting consequences. The building becomes a home, a workplace, and a national symbol at the same time. Not a palace, not a private house, something new. Yet one reality remains. Jefferson can shape space. He can soften the symbol. But he cannot control what lies beyond the walls. The building is still young. The nation is still fragile. And the world is moving. Power has learned to adapt. But soon, it will be tested. 1814. When power was burned, Washington City, summer of 1814. The conflict known as the War of 1812 has entered its third year. Its causes are not rooted in a single battle. They are the result of accumulated tensions. British naval blockades disrupt American trade. American sailors are seized at sea, and the United States is treated as a former colony, not yet fully outside the orbit of empire. America declares war, but it is an uneven fight. The army is young, the budget is thin, and the defenses of the capital are largely symbolic. Then the war moves directly toward the center of power. August 24, 1814. British forces march into Washington after American troops collapse at the Battle of Bladensburg, just 6 miles from the capital. The city is virtually undefended. The federal government withdraws in haste. The president at the time is James Madison, one of the principal architects of the Constitution, now forced to abandon the very capital he helped design in theory. Meanwhile, inside the president's house, Dolly Madison remains. She is the First Lady of the United States, the wife of the sitting president. Dolly Madison holds no military rank. She commands no troops. She possesses no executive authority, but she is not a political bystander. For more than a decade, Dolly Madison has functioned as the social center of federal power. Through receptions and gatherings, she has bridged hostile factions, softened ideological divides, and stabilized relationships. Inside a fragile young republic, she understands something many overlook. Power does not exist only in laws or armies. It also lives in symbols. As news of the British advance grows urgent, Dolly Madison does not attempt to defend the building. She focuses on something else, what cannot be allowed to fall. She orders the removal of government papers, diplomatic correspondence, critical records, and then she turns to a single object, the full-length portrait of George Washington. This is not simply a painting. George Washington is more than a historical figure. He is the embodiment of legitimacy, the bridge between revolution and statehood, the face through which the young nation justifies its own authority. Dolly Madison understands this clearly. The portrait is too large to remove intact. The frame is broken apart. The canvas is cut free and carefully rolled. Not to save art, but to preserve political meaning. When Dolly Madison leaves the house, British troops enter. According to contemporary accounts, the dining table is still set, the meal untouched. A brief, unsettling moment. Power has withdrawn, but ritual remains. British forces then set fire to the city, not randomly, not in confusion. They burn with intent. The president's house, the Capitol, the Treasury, other central government buildings. This is not merely a military act. It is a political message. In old empire, reminding a new republic, flames consume the interior of the president's house. Wooden floors, staircases, roof frames, furniture. Everything that can burn does. Only the sandstone walls remain, blackened by smoke, cracked by heat, but still standing. That night, Washington glows in fire. The flames are visible for miles. Then, unexpectedly, a violent storm moves in. Heavy rain, powerful winds. Some accounts even describe a small tornado. The storm does not save the house, but it halts total destruction and forces British troops to withdraw from the city. By morning, Washington lies in ruins. Also clicking in matter, 70 question, Washington and a man from 70 question sitter. The president's house is a burned shell. The Capitol is severely damaged. The physical center of national power has temporarily vanished. Almost immediately, is buying, a question emerges. Should the capital remain here or be moved to a safer city, Philadelphia, or another established center? This is not just a practical debate, it is a question of national will. The decision is made, Washington will be rebuilt, the president's house will rise again, on the same foundation. Not because it is convenient, but because allowing the enemy's message to stand is not an option. The house was gone, but the idea was not. Rebuilding, power returns, Washington City, early 1815. After the fire of 1814, the American capital is not only damaged, it is questioned. The president's house stands as a blackened stone shell. The capital lies heavily scarred. And for the first time, many wonder whether this center of power has failed its first real test. A question quickly follows: should it be rebuilt at all? The debate is not limited to Congress. It runs through the national psyche. To rebuild is to challenge the humiliation. To abandon the site is to accept defeat. Some argue for relocation. Philadelphia is mentioned again. New York briefly returns to consideration. But the final decision is not made on convenience. It is made on political meaning. Washington will remain the capital, and the president's house will rise again, on the same foundation. Not because it is cheaper, not because it is faster, but because retreat would allow the burning of 1814 to stand as a victorious message from the invader. The architect called back is James Hoban, the same man who designed the original building. His return is deliberate. Hoban understands the proportions, the rhythm of the columns, the logic of the sandstone walls. More importantly, he understands what must not change. Reconstruction begins in 1815 and continues through 1817. For nearly 3 years, the president's house becomes a construction site once again. But this time, the purpose is no longer experimental. The purpose is assertion. The surviving sandstone walls are examined one by one. Some stones are cracked by heat. Others must be replaced. Yet much of the original structure remains intact. That fact carries meaning beyond engineering. The foundation of power has endured fire. Hoban preserves the original design. Often, no dramatic expansions, no symbolic exaggeration. The rebuilding is not meant to impress. It is meant to deliver a clear message. Power does not need to change its shape to prove it still exists. During reconstruction, a decision with lasting symbolic impact is made. The exterior stone is coated with a white lime-based paint, partly to protect the sandstone from weather, partly to conceal the scars of fire. But the visual effect goes far beyond maintenance. The charred structure of 1814 emerges bright, uniform, and unmistakable from a distance. From this point forward, a lot of PVO, the name the White House gains widespread use, not through an official decree, but through common recognition. A new symbol is born out of reconstruction. By 1817, the building is ready to be occupied again. President James Monroe moves into the restored residence. It is no longer a skeletal seat of power, no longer a ruin. It is a symbol that has survived destruction and returned. Rebuilding does not erase the memory of 1814. That memory remains embedded beneath the surface. American power is not defined by never being attacked. It is defined by the ability to stand again after destruction. The White House returns, not unchanged, but as a symbol that has been tested by fire. Why white? From a residence to a symbol, Washington City, early 19th century. After the Reconstruction, Ad hoc incessanhem, the White House did not simply return, It changed the way it was seen. At first, white was not a declaration. It was a practical solution. The Acacia sandstone walls had been heavily stained by smoke after the fire of 1814. A white lime wash was applied to cover the burn marks, to even out the surface of the stone, and to protect the structure from weather. This was a common building practice at the time. It was not announced as a political statement, but the image it created was something else. In daylight, the building appeared clearer, brighter, visible from a distance, in a city still unfinished, with muddy roads, scattered construction, and few completed landmarks. The president's house began to stand out naturally, not because it was taller, not because it was larger, but because it was easier to see. White also produced a psychological effect. It erased the visual memory of destruction. It softened the scars of war. In its place came a sense of order, stability, and continuity. The building no longer looked like a structure that had survived a disaster. It began to look like something 100 that had always been there. In the decades that followed, the phrase, "the White House," spread quietly, first in letters, then in newspapers, then in everyday speech. It existed alongside official names like the President's House or the Executive Mansion. There was no single decree renaming it. The name endured because it matched the image. By the late 19th century, the White House had become more than a description. It became a word of power. When people said, "the White House," they were no longer referring to a building. They meant decisions. They meant policy. They meant the voice of the American presidency. The formal turning point came in 1901. President Theodore Roosevelt standardized the name. From that moment on, the White House became the official designation in documents, stationery, and public communication. This was not merely symbolic. Roosevelt governed a different America, a nation rapidly industrializing, a country stepping onto the global stage. And the White House, in its unmistakable white form, became the perfect backdrop for modern executive power. White was no longer just paint. It was visual authority. It made the building instantly recognizable in photographs, illustrations, and soon, moving images. A simple form, but impossible to confuse with anything else. From an unfinished residence, from a structure once reduced to ruins, the White House became a global symbol. Not because it never fell, but because it was rebuilt, seen, and named. In a way, power needed to be remembered. The White House today. Power in the age of exposure. Washington, D.C., 21st century. The White House today is no longer just a residence. It is a system. Physically, the White House still follows the core form, designed by James Hoban at the end of the 18th century. But inside, almost everything has changed. More than 130 rooms, spread across approximately 55,000 square feet, or over 5,100 square meters. Quote, a historic structure. Quote, 7 Israeli Absin, AP News Reuters, now operating as the nerve center of COM, the world's largest economy, with a GDP exceeding 25 trillion US dollars. The White House today is not simply where a president lives. It is where military actions are authorized, economic sanctions are signed, phone calls are made that can move global markets within minutes. Every room no longer serves only an architectural function, but a political one. Beneath its classical exterior exists a level of security that never existed in the building's early history. A multi-layered defense system, restricted airspace, surrounding radar and air defense coverage, the United States Secret Service operating around the clock. The modern White House is one of the most heavily protected buildings on Earth, but modern power does not come only from walls and weapons. It comes from images. By the mid-23rd century, the White House entered a new era, the age of television. Speeches were no longer meant for a few hundred people in a room. They were broadcast to millions, and eventually billions worldwide. A podium in front of the White House became a global stage. Every frame is calculated, the white facade as backdrop, classical columns suggesting stability, an open space, tightly controlled. None of it is accidental. It is the visual language of power, but this is where the story turns. The modern White House no longer represents consensus alone. It has become a focal point of division. Protests at the gates, security fences raised and removed with each political era, nights when Washington grows tense, as American citizens stand face to face with their own symbol of authority. At this point, the White House is no longer just where power is exercised. It is where power is challenged. With each presidency, the building absorbs another layer of meaning. The same rooms, different uses, different relationships with the press, different appearances before the public, different distances from the people. The White House reflects not only the power of the individual inside it, but the condition of the nation itself. In the age of social media, the White House no longer controls its own narrative. Every image is analyzed, every sentence clipped, every gesture archived. Power today is not only exercised, it is constantly scrutinized. And this is the central paradox. A building created to symbolize permanence now exists in a world that shifts by the second. The White House still stands, but its meaning has never been fixed. From the swamps of the Potomac to the ashes of 1814, to the white paint that became a symbol, and now to the center of a global information storm, the White House today is not just where power is used, it is where power is seen, questioned, and remembered. The legacy of power. From the outside, the White House appears balanced, classical, familiar. But its story was never only about architecture. It was born from compromise between North and South, between money and power, between ideals and reality. No side fully won. And that tension shaped everything that followed. It grew within contradiction, a symbol of democracy, constructed by hands, denied democratic rights, a place meant to represent freedom, yet marked by the absence of it. That contradiction never disappeared. It was simply layered over with time. And then there is endurance. The building was burned, but power did not abandon it. It was rebuilt, painted white, seen more clearly than ever before. Not because it was flawless, but because it remained. Today, the White House is more than a seat of decision-making. It is a place where power is watched, debated, challenged. Each generation that passes through its gates leaves behind a new layer of meaning. And perhaps that is its true legacy. Not purity, not consistency, but the ability to contain the contradictions that power always carries. So the question remains, can a building truly represent democracy when it was built by those denied it? If this story stayed with you, the videos on screen go further, into the estates, symbols, and spaces, where power is created, displayed, and sometimes undone in unexpected ways. Thank you for watching until the end. If you found this meaningful, consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment with your thoughts. See you in the next story.